Let's get into it. Busy Tuesday night in the sport. I want to start with what happened in Columbia, South Carolina. Final score was South Carolina 68, Ole Miss 65. And what that means is that the Gamecocks are now 20-3 overall, 8-2 in the SEC after being picked dead last in the preseason. There are 14 schools in the SEC. South Carolina was picked 14th, but now the Gamecocks are tied for first in the win column of the league standings. And if Alabama loses at Auburn tonight, which is the projected outcome, we will have a three-way tie atop the SEC standings between Alabama, Auburn, and South Carolina. No Kentucky, no Tennessee, no Arkansas, no Florida, no Texas A&M. By the end of the night, it could be Alabama, Auburn, South Carolina, tied for first in the SEC. Dead leg. I've got the Gamecocks 13th in the top 25-1. What do you make what's happening in Columbia right now?
Gamecocks, man. Shout out to Devin Downey right off the top of the show. Good to be with you here on this Wednesday morning. And if there's any listener or viewer out there that feels so inclined to look this up, this is a little bit of a tough research project. But as you mentioned that, I just wonder, let's go past 20 seasons. All right, do the cutoff at 20 seasons. How many times has a high major program finished first in its league? And I would qualify that can be tied for first at the end of the regular season or outright championship. How many times has a school been picked last and finished first? I don't know the answer. I'm curious on that. I wonder if it's happened at a high major program. So I'll even say that you can put the earlier versions of CUSA into the bucket if you want. The American Athletic Conference for the first 6-7 years of its existence. I wonder if it's happened 2 or 3 times. Period. South Carolina is now in that discussion by nature of its win over Ole Miss there. And first of all, this is kind of a wild one. It's the first time since 1996-97 when South Carolina won the SEC championship that season that this program has won 6 straight SEC games. So at no point in the past 25 plus seasons had the Gamecocks ever gone 6 in a row, 6 up in SEC play. And they responded to prosperity well, because right now you said you've got them 13th. They are 15th in the AP top 25 as of Monday's refresh GP. It's the highest ranking for the team since the 97-98 season when they got as high as number 5 coming off that strong 96-97 campaign there. So I think the defense is what leads me to believe that South Carolina now has a genuine shot to finish atop the SEC. I wouldn't put them as the most likely team, but I will say this. I brought up their wins above bubble right now. Nationally, wins above bubble, which as a quick reminder is how many more wins you've gotten versus your schedule versus what the average bubble team, according to Torvik's metric, would say. And the order goes: Purdue at 8.2 is number 1. Number 2 is UConn, 6.5, so almost 2 full wins behind. 3 is Houston. 4 is Dayton. Hello, Flyers. We'll mention you before the show's out of here. 5 is Marquette. Tied with Marquette is South Carolina for 5th in wins above bubble. 3.8 more wins to this point than would be expected from an average bubble team. They're doing a wonderful job here, and Lamont Paris has a team that isn't still projecting well in terms of efficiency at this point, but I've seen enough of South Carolina to this point to know that he's got something really good cooking here, and they could be headed toward. You can read off the. I'm sure you've got the quadrant numbers. I don't have them up in front of me, but I think our listeners are going to want to know that they could be headed toward 2 or 3 seed territory if they can dodge any bad losses. Now they are going to take L's because they still have. Roadie against Auburn a week from today. They'll wrap up at Mississippi State. They've got to host Tennessee. But I think the schedule actually breaks for them fairly favorably, GP, in the SEC. And Taylon Cooper, Michi Johnson, BJ Mack, they just seem to, I really, apologies for steering right into a cliche, but I'm telling you, having watched South Carolina now 7 or 8 times this season, they do find ways to just get the damn job done. And they did it, against a Mississippi team that had plenty to prove, but couldn't get it, couldn't pull it off there. Congrats to the Gamecocks, 20-3. I will say they fall short of winning the SEC, but I think that they will wind up being at, 1 game out of the top slot and wind up with a 2, 3, or I guess at worst 4 seed in the SEC tournament.
As you pointed out, they're still not great in the predictive metrics outside of the top 40 at KenPom, outside of the top 40 of the net. But we've reached the point of the season where I do pay attention to those numbers but I am more interested in your resume, in your body of work, than I am your computer numbers. And the body of work is like it's not Purdue level, it's not UConn level, but it's good. They're 3-2 in quadrant 1, 5-0 in quadrant 2, so 8-2 in the first 2 quadrants, with 1 quadrant 3 loss. Do you realize if they didn't have that quadrant 3 loss, they would be in top 5 range right now?
Yeah. From a resume perspective, yeah, but they
they do have it, sure. But Tennessee, for instance, just to compare here and contrast, Tennessee is 9-5 in the first 2 quadrants, and I've got Tennessee in the top 5 of the top 25 and 1. Now, Tennessee, they have 1 more quadrant 1 win than South Carolina. They obviously don't have the quadrant 3 loss. They've only got 1 loss outside of quadrant 1. My point is not that South Carolina should be ranked where Tennessee is right now necessarily, but if you could take that quadrant 3 loss off of the resume, and that is a home loss to Georgia, then South Carolina's body of work would arguably be top 5 in the country. And arguably it might be right now, because trivia time, what do you think their strength of record is?
Based on what I said with wins above bubble, I'll say they are, at this point, they've got to be, I'll say number 11. That's a shot in the dark.
4
GP.
Strength of record is 4. And I remember having these conversations, and I thought about this morning because I led the top 25 and 1 with South Carolina. We had these types of conversations with Kansas State last season because they were picked last in the Big 12 heading into Jerome Tang's first season. Now, KSU obviously didn't win the Big 12, but they did go to the Elite 8, and Jerome Tang was an obvious National Coach of the Year candidate. I don't know if we ever got a definitive answer to the question you asked at the top, which is, has a power conference school ever won its league after being picked dead last in the preseason? If somebody can dive in, knock yourself out. I ain't got the time. I'm not
a shout out. If anyone finds it, I'm not asking. This is a real homework assignment. But if you get it and you can show your work, we'll give you a shout out on the Friday podcast.
Yeah, I'm not a researcher. I'm a talker and a ranker of basketball teams, but not a researcher. So I let other people research. But I was Googling this morning. I Google every morning, if I'm being honest. But I was Googling this morning just to confirm that South Carolina was in fact picked last in the SEC in the preseason. I knew that. I thought that, but I just wanted to check my work, So I'm Googling, was South Carolina picked last in the SEC? And I stumble into a piece from thebigspur.com, which covers South Carolina athletics.
As one does, yes, of course.
And there were some really interesting quotes from Lamont Paris in there from Media Day back in October, when he is informed that you have been picked last in the SEC. Here's what he said. Remember, this ain't last night after they improved to 20-3. This is in October when they were projected to finish last in the league. Lamont Paris said, quote, "I take it personal, and I take it personal for a lot of reasons. Ultimately, it says we don't think that coach is very good, or we don't think those players are very good. There's no denying that. You think the coaching or the players are not very good at South Carolina, and that's okay. But you're not there every day. I'm there every day. I'm going to take that personally." And he went on to say, how could you pick us last? I don't understand how you could look at what we are and pick us last. It makes no sense unless you believe the coach is no good or the players are no good. And he has certainly backed that up. I'm with you. I don't know that they'll win the SEC. I'm not going to predict them to win the SEC. But I will tell you, when we were talking about them very briefly several weeks ago, because they were starting to build the resume and starting to legitimize themselves with quality wins, I said, I think the difference between, say, South Carolina and Tennessee is that South Carolina is they're going to be a problem for people at home. I just don't know that they're going to be able to go on the road and win enough games to actually finish with the best record in the SEC. I think Tennessee is going to be able to go on the road and win games. I don't know if South Carolina is going to be able to go on the road and win games. That's what I said a few weeks ago. Since then, they've won at Arkansas, at Tennessee, and at Georgia. They're proving people wrong. They're really, really good.
Yep.
And it's a reminder that when you hear new coaches, first year, second year, third year, talk about how they need time or ask for patience, I'm not saying that in some circumstances you don't need time. I understand. But what we just watched is Lamont Paris struggle in year one at South Carolina and then totally remake the roster. Like, he struggled last year at South Carolina, finished near the bottom of the SEC, and then lost his leading scorer, GG Jackson, to the NBA draft. So, okay, how are they going to be? Like, I understand why they were picked last in the SEC or near the bottom of the SEC, but he went out and rebuilt the roster through the transfer portal. Right now, 4 of the top 5 scorers at South Carolina are players who were not in the program last season. And 3 of the top 4 are transfers. You mentioned Mack. He was at Wofford last season. Cooper was at Minnesota last season. Miles Stewart was at Vanderbilt last season. And then they got Colin Murray-Bowles as a freshman. He was ranked 108th in the class of 2023. But he got 16 points, 9 rebounds in the win over Ole Miss last night. He's their 5th leading scorer. My point is, no matter what position you find yourself at the power conference level, if you've got the right coach and you've got the right NIL, it's just possible to build a team in one off season. We saw it at Kansas State before Jerome Tang's first season. He went out and got Keontae Johnson, Marquise Noel, and built an Elite 8 team from nothing. And it looks like Lamont Paris has now done that in advance of his 2nd season at South Carolina. And it's why, again, when you hear other relatively new coaches at even bigger schools talk about they need more time or this thing's a process, it wasn't a process for Jerome Tang. He just went out and got the job done at Kansas State. And it's not been a process for Lamont Paris. He rebuilt that roster last offseason, and now he's got one of the best teams in the country.
Colin Murray-Boyles led the team against Ole Miss with 16 points. That's also Colin Murray-Boyles sounds like someone that might have been on the original cast of the UK Office, or like or a guest star on Peep Show. Very British sounding dude down there in at South Carolina, and Lamont Paris is doing this without at this point statistically, like without a top 5 player in the SEC. There's no one on the roster that's going to be in contention to win SEC Player of the Year, which is all the more impressive, frankly. And he has, wildly overshot expectations, not just with preseason SEC coaches poll and media poll, but also it not going so well last season. Just the presumption was that, this was just going to be a rough year 2, and then we'll see if they could get it going in year 3. And love it, man. Every year I say this, we get these awesome twists to the season where you just look up and you got a team that's ranked in the top 25 that wasn't considered to be anything close to that heading in. And South Carolina applies in that situation as much as any team in the country. 20-3 Gamecock fans, I know you're thrilled. I'd say all of the state of South Carolina right now at the moment is pretty thrilled because we got to get to the other one that got a big win on Tuesday night. But yeah, big on the Gamecocks, and then real quick on Ole Miss. 18-5 now with a 5-5 record. Alan Flanagan went for 26 in this game. South Carolina kind of shut down Ole Miss's eye for shooting 3-pointers. They made 4 out of 10, but they only took 10, and they played a good game on the road, but it just wasn't enough. And to me, it was reinforcing for South Carolina's bona fides. Ole Miss now has lost 4 of 7 after starting the season 15-1, and in my opinion, has slid right onto the bubble.
I think South Carolina is legitimately good. I think Ole Miss, whatever it has accomplished because Chris Beard is excellent. I think he's won them some games they otherwise wouldn't win, and he's kept them in some games they otherwise wouldn't be in. But ultimately, he might just not have the roster he needs to really push this thing where it looked like it might have been going, say, earlier in the season. I think Ole Miss can still make the NCAA tournament, but they come back to reality a little bit as they've gone down through the SEC schedule. One last thing on South Carolina. GG Jackson, who was their leading scorer last season, he's my neighbor now. Not technically, but like we live in the same area. And he was asked about South Carolina, a few weeks ago, because I don't know, you're probably not following it. I don't know why you would.
Yeah, but you have mentioned this on the show. Keep going.
But because of, the Grizzlies have been without 13 of their players recently, like literally 13 players ruled out. The other day they played and they had 2 players like full-time players available. That's it. They had to, and so, but GJ Jackson has got to play a lot in the NBA, and he's playing well. Like, he looks good. He looks like a steal with the 45th pick in the draft. He was asked about South Carolina. He said, I would have never said this a year ago. I'm paraphrasing, but he said, I might have been the problem. Like, I was there. We weren't good. Now I'm gone. They're very good. I need to own that. And I thought that was a mature thing to hear come out of his mouth. And just, alternate universe. I was thinking about this the other day. If GG Jackson never reclassifies, for people who don't know, he was originally in the class of 2023, reclassed to 22, then went to South Carolina, but he was initially committed to Carolina. If GG Jackson were at North Carolina right now and playing exactly the way he's playing in the NBA, but doing it at North Carolina right now, he really might be the number one pick in the next draft.
Well, that time has come and gone, but yes, that is certainly conceivable to see how that might have been the case.
It's just something to think about. If you're the next phenom considering reclassifying, like it cost GG Jackson literally millions of dollars to do that. Now, I understand why he did it, because he got lots of money to do it, presumably. But it cost him a lot of money. And if you took GG Jackson right now and said, you're the way you're playing right now, I'm going to pretend you were playing that way at North Carolina, what would the mock drafts look like? He'd probably be a projected top 5 pick. But for now, he'll just continue to score points and grab rebounds for a Grizzlies team that is shorthanded and struggling.